In this Diablo 4 build video, I'm going to be showing you my Pulverizing Werebear, which is a Druid build that focuses on the use of some Werebear skills as well as summoning skills, and is a ton of fun to play, but is quite a bit different than the Werewolf build I did previously. So first of all, let's talk about the main mechanic of this build, which is based around Pulverize, and Pulverize is sort of an AoE, a medium smallish AoE around you that deals a ton of damage if you have the enhanced Pulverize passive, because essentially what it does is it allows you to overpower this attack every 10 seconds as long as you have 80% or higher HP. That means if you have this spirit and you walk up to a group of enemies and hit Pulverize, you will usually wipe them all out in one attack because the amount of damage this does is absolutely incredible. Now the caveat to this is that you have to be above 80% health, and if you drop below 80% health anytime in that cooldown period of 10 seconds, it will restart. Like, it won't even start again until you're above 80%. So you need to pay attention to your health very carefully with this build and getting things like raising your max HP, popping potions a little more frequently, and using Earthen Bulwark, which is our damage shield for this build, are very important so that you can maintain that extra damage you get from Pulverize, because that's really what's going to allow you to just tear through groups of enemies. Additionally, getting bonuses on your gear like overpower damage or damage to healthy targets is also really good, because this will allow you to get the most possible damage when you lead off with Pulverize. Now sometimes obviously you're not going to have enough spirit to just walk up and hit Pulverize, and you'll have to attack with Maul first. But generally speaking, you want to try and have some left over from your previous battle that you can just walk up and hit Pulverize. So just make sure, you know, if you're fighting like 2 enemies or something, you don't waste your Pulverize on them, and you use Maul in order to build up spirit so that when they're dead, that you can go on and Pulverize the next group very, very easily. So let's take a look at Maul now that we've talked about Pulverize. This is your resource gainer. This is what you're going to use in order to gain spirit to use Pulverize. And it attacks very, very slowly, but it does hit in an area a little bit so that you can clip a lot of enemies at once with it. But what I recommend doing is getting the rapid aspect on your weapon in order to increase your attack speed drastically, because you get double the effect if it's a two-handed weapon in order to use this much more effectively. You use this a lot during boss fights, and you do use it a lot in regular fights as well. So it's not a bad thing to take, and if you don't want to put it on your main weapon or something like that, at least get it on one of the pieces of armor so that you have some increase to your attack speed. Otherwise, it's going to feel very, very slow. So this takes us to Earthen Bulwark. This is our damage shield or barrier that we used with this build, and it's very important to have something like this with our build, because you're going to get hit, because you're going to be in melee range, but you don't want your HP to go below 80% if possible. So using that Earthen Bulwark, which only has a 3-second duration, you have to kind of learn when to use it and how to use it, and to anticipate, you know, getting hit before your overpower comes off cooldown, or whether your Pulverize comes off cooldown with that 10-second time to get that overpower extra damage. Because ideally you want to use Pulverize in between your overpowers, but you also want to make sure that that timer is counting down so that when it hits 10 seconds you get that extra burst damage. You don't want it to fall below 80 and you didn't notice, and then all of a sudden you're doing lots of Pulverizes, but you're not getting that damage that you want. So keeping that health above that, and Earthen Bulwark is really the means that we use to do that. The aspect of Mending Stone actually extends the duration of this to 6 seconds, which I think is great to pick up. So if you want to get that on your legendary gear, that's really good for this build, because 3 seconds is not a lot of time for a damage shield. Beyond this, we also use Vine Creeper, Wolves, and Ravens. So Vine Creeper, if you watch the Werewolf video, you'll know is a kind of does poison damage to a random enemy by itself passively, but then when you use the active skill, it'll actually root everything in a good space around you, much wider than Pulverize, and deal poison damage to it over time. It is possibly one of the best Druid skills out there, no matter what Druid build you're using, just because of this huge AoE CC that deals damage at the same time. You can root enemies with it and then walk up and Pulverize very, very easily. And what I like about Ravens is that it's not the passive damage that they deal, you know, every so often. It's the AoE damage over time that they can drop somewhere. It gives you another AoE ability, but also the fact that you can upgrade this to apply vulnerable in that area. So you can drop it on a boss or drop it on an elite and make them vulnerable for a certain amount of time while it's dealing damage to them, while you're attacking them with your attacks, while you're using Pulverize on them at the same time. So this is a really good effect to have, and it's one that you should use like as often as you possibly can. It's also good for dealing with like ranged enemies that, you know, you don't want to walk all the way over to. You don't have a lot of movement speed as a Werebear usually. So, you know, being able to take out ranged enemies without having to go all the way over to them can be very helpful also. Now in our last spot, I alternate between Wolves and Hurricane. Wolves are really good for boss fights in my opinion. Their attack, a single target, is good for boss fights, but more importantly, they can tank bosses. I've done a lot of difficult bosses in this game that I think were only possible because I had those wolves, where I could sit back and range them with ravens, and I could use hurricane or something like that at a distance, or I could use pulverize at a distance, or hit and run tactics while I let my wolves tank them. Because even if like a wolf dies in combat, they'll respawn and come back. So they can just sit there and tank bosses for you where you stay at a safe distance. And some of the hardest bosses in this game are actually made possible by having them. Unfortunately, the wolves aren't as good out on the landscape as they are in boss scenarios, which is why I recommend also having hurricane and swapping them back and forth, maybe depending on what you're doing, because hurricane is really good out pulling trash or in dungeons, because it's just AoE damage around you wherever you move, and you're constantly going into melee range anyway. So if you root everything with like Vine Creeper, for instance, and then walk in with hurricane and then drop Pulverize, everything on the screen is toast. So that's a really good one. If you get into a boss fight or you know you're going to a boss room, swap it out for wolves and you'll have a bit easier of a time. So things you want to look out for this build: critical strike chance is good, overpower damage is good because that's going to help increase your pulverize damage even more. Damage to close enemies, damage to vulnerable enemies is good. Damage to healthy enemies is good again because you usually lead off with pulverize. And especially life on kill is good. That will help it make it so that your life gets topped off. If you walk up to a group of enemies, hit pulverize, but you take a couple hits at the same time, that'll just top you back off, and you don't have to like worry that you're getting closer to that 80% mark and you have your whole bandwidth between 81% and 100% still left. So life on kill is very, very big for this build. And just before I wrap up this video, a couple really good legendary aspects to get are the Shepherd's aspect. This increases your core skill damage, which in this case is Pulverize, for each active companion you have. And since we have all of them out, that's going to make Pulverize hit even harder, which is perfect for this build. And the other one is Aspect of the Ursine Horror. This makes it so that Pulverize is now considered an Earth skill, and that after casting it, Tectonic Spikes continue to deal damage over 2 seconds. So this is just going to make this ability even stronger. So definitely recommend getting this one if you can. So that wraps up our Pulverizing Werebear build. I really enjoyed playing it in this game. I'm not sure I liked it as much as the Werewolf, but it was still very fun to play and was the first Druid build I played during the beta. Again, we do have 2 Necromancer builds coming tomorrow, so you can look forward to that.